Hey, I'm John Mann. I got to fly MiG-21s and MiG-23s back in the 80s as a part of the Air Force's Constant Peg program. In this episode, we're going to go back into the cockpit of this Soviet-era variable geometry fighter aircraft. There's a ton of things going on in this cockpit and all the labels are in Russian. So today, we've got a Russian linguist who's going to help us read and decipher what all these switches say. This one's going to be cool. It's time to go behind the wings. We're at the Wings Over the Rockies Air and Space Museum, where we have more than 60 air and space craft. One of them is a MiG-23. In parts 1 and 2 of our series on the MiG, we explored the Constant Peg program. So go check those out for more history on the program and on the MiG-23. With all that out of the way, let's take a closer look at the cockpit. Well, we're here at the airplane, this MiG-23, and we've got a special guest today, Bob Marion. Bob's a historian and a Russian linguist. Bob, tell us some more about yourself.
Спасибо вам. Очень приятно. Доброе утро. Меня зовут Robert Marion. My name is Bob Marion. I'm a historian and a consultant at Buckley Space Force Base, and it's my pleasure today to be here with John and help decipher some of the Russian language that covers this aircraft.
We had some questions back when we flew them 40 years ago, and with time and so forth passing by, I've got more questions. So let's jump in the cockpit and see if we can decipher this thing. All right, here we are. So the challenge here is some of these are words, some of these are abbreviations and acronyms, and that gets into some pretty different level stuff.
It's important to note that this aircraft was manufactured in the Soviet Union in 1984, and the language has changed as well over 40 years since this aircraft came out of production. Much of this terminology, it may not exist on their current crop of third, fourth, fifth generation fighters.
Okay.
Rumor has it that it wasn't sufficient to just acquire an aircraft such as the MiG-23. You also had to somehow or another acquire an operating manual and sit down with a team of linguists and ideally engineers who would have expertise in trying to divine what some of the terminology meant.
This picture here is a picture of one of our actual airplanes, a MiG-23 MS. NATO call sign Flogger E. This is a MiG-23 something else.
MLAE-2.
Okay, different model. So this cockpit is different from this cockpit, at least to some degree. We've talked in this airplane about this being the K panel over here. Our little K switch was this guy right there. We called it the K because the Cyrillic letters looked kind of like C-A-Y. I don't know really what it said. For our airplane, it was like right in this area. And in this airplane, people have changed the labels to English in many cases. The idea was to keep the airplanes as much like the realistic thing as possible, while at the same time enabling us to have a little bit of comfort or a little bit of automatic in what we're used to flying. And so this altimeter, which is in kilometers, was replaced with something a round gauge that was common to T-38s, F-4s, everything else that we've been flying at the time. The airspeed was replaced with, for us, normal nautical miles per hour gauge, and it had a Mach number on it also. We had a US oxygen system so that our US helmet and oxygen connections would work, and we had US radios. Again, it's been almost 40 years, but I think that's the only thing that we changed. In many ways, like American airplanes or other airplanes that we've flown, you've got a control stick here in the middle, you got throttles on the left and rudder pedals, and they do the same things that other airplanes do. Flight instruments are grouped over here on the left. An attitude indicator. This is going to be...
Speed, airspeed.
Okay.
Skorost.
So this is going to go around one time to 1,000. And I'm going to guess it goes around a second time. Do you know what the units are on this one?
There are no units indicated on it at all, John, unfortunately. It just says speed.
So it's going to be kilometers per hour, I'm going to guess. And so once around to be 1,000. And the second time around it'd be 2,000. And I guess it's a mystery is how you know which 1,000 you're on. This guy here, can we read this one?
Altitude.
Altitude.
Высота.
And then this one down here is going to be Mach number, I'm going to guess?
Yes, I believe so. That's correct.
Now this particular model is different from the one I flew. The one I flew stopped at 2.3 or 2.33. Roughly 2.3 Mach was as fast as you could go before you ran into controllability problems. This meter goes up to Mach 3. The one I flew was not thrust limited, it would go faster, but I don't know if this airplane would actually go past that red line or not. How about this guy here? Do we know what that one says?
That says oil. We have the same unit of measure, kilograms per square centimeter may be an indicator for, yes, the danger level. You see the red slash there. But on the left, at the bottom, is the word kislorod, which means oxygen. I don't understand why those two are especially paired together. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Well, Bob, welcome to our world. We didn't understand a lot about this airplane either.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Over on this direction, we're going to have the navigation system, a compass, and these steering bars will tell you go up and go down. And some of the older MiGs, they had a data link from the ground which would make these needles move, and the pilot would follow these navigation needles. The attitude indicator here is a little bit different from ones that you see in U.S. airplanes. On U.S. airplanes, you have a ball, and the ball goes up and down, the ball rolls left and right when you bank the airplane. This one was disorienting the first time I saw it because it only goes up and down. For roll, you have these bars that move. So this actual airplane right here rolls as you roll the wings. We're all used to the ball moving. So when you rolled the airplane and the ball didn't move, and instead these things moved, that was a new look.
I believe in Russian they would reference that as the искусственный горизонт, the artificial horizon.
Back to how this relates to other airplanes, again, the up and down is real. This is going to be the trim switch. It trims the nose up and nose down. Most American planes have a left and right, and then a yaw trim. For ours, they were down here, and I'm going to wonder if these words here don't say the trim.
They do in fact say trim, correct.
Okay, and one's going to be for roll and one's for yaw?
I believe so, correct, yes.
Okay, pitch and then roll and yaw down here with the left hand.
Something I never noticed before, but we were looking at other gauges. On the left side of the joystick here, the ручка направления, there's some writing there. Vibros pomech. Pomech is the Russian word for jamming. So apparently this aircraft incorporated jamming elements. The red switch that you're pulling, that says jettison.
I don't recall that switch. If we had it, we never talked about it, but that's interesting.
Yeah.
And it is guarded, which backs up.
Yes, sir, and it's in red too.
It's common language. Red is going to hurt. You push or pull something in red.
Okay.
Angle of attack. This airplane was limited in angle of attack before it would have controllability issues. And that angle of attack would depend on the wing sweep. If the wings were swept all the way forward, you had a lower angle of attack limit. If they were swept aft, you had a higher one.
Pilots today, we use the terms a stabilizer, vertical stabilizer, a fin. The word in Russian is a keel, which means a stabilizer, or in our application with the MiG-23 here, we would reference it as a fin, a vertical fin, for example, which this airplane incorporates in the rear lower fuselage.
Well, that's a great transition. The fin is folded up for landing and takeoff and folded down for in-flight, and it was hooked to the landing gear switch. So we have the landing gear handle here, which is you push in to raise, but I can't raise it because the gear lock is down. So I raise the gear lock,
Okay.
push in and raise the gear, and the gear will come up. And I've got to check that the fin comes down, because if the fin doesn't come down, I got a problem.
Now, just incidentally, for what it's worth, Cyrillic letters K, V, KV, these might translate into keel,
Yep.
vertikalny, vertical keel,
right.
okay? So that would be consistent with your interpretation.
Well, that's my guess. I can't claim to be an interpreter.
Okay.
Our airplanes, you could turn the nose gear steering on and turn it off. And you could also turn the nose wheel brake on and off. I don't see but one switch. That's this one. It's red. I'm not sure if we know what that one says.
That says avarny tarmos, emergency brake.
Okay, there you go. There's your emergency brake. So you're going to pull that
Pull that.
to stop. Normally, this handle here is the brake handle. We had an air system, a normal air system, pneumatic system for brakes, and you pull that. Those systems, if I recall correctly, did not replenish in flight. You aired them up before flight and you took off and flew. So if you ran out of brake pressure, then you'd have an emergency brake to actually help you stop. It's called an emergency brake. You might also just call it system number 2 or the backup system. Over here on the left side, throttles. There's the throttle lock here. There's also a throttle lock when you get it into afterburner, and this helps get you out of that. You also have the flap positions here, flaps up. As we know, this airplane has a swing wing that goes all the way back 72 degrees, and then almost out 90, and that's this handle. And so we have 16 degrees, 45, and 72. These are 3 discrete positions, but this The handle can be placed anywhere along that spectrum. Some guys might put it a little bit forward of 45 to get a little bit of extra maneuvering out of it. The combination of this position and your angle of attack limits changed with your wing position. And by the way, the flaps had to be all the way up to sweep the wings back at all. And if the wings were swept back, these buttons didn't work.
John, I have a technical question. Did the angle of attack gauge, did this work in conjunction with the wing position lever there?
What I remember is we had different limits. Our airplane had a knuckle wrapper, what we called a knuckle wrapper. It banged your hand when you had too much angle of attack, when you exceeded the limits. It was not a tap, it was a bang. So when you started getting a hit, you'd check your AOA to see where you were, and you'd normally let go of that, because if you did exceed AOA, you'd have a problem with stalling or going out of control. Not necessarily a stall and out of control, but you would exceed the rudder's capability to keep longitudinal flight, and you have an excursion. So the AOA and the knuckle wrapper was pretty important to us. Oh, let's check the fuel gauge in this thing. This guy here?
Yes.
I know it is,
Yes.
because it works like their fuel gauge.
This little word here, Bach, means tank, okay? So Kriel is short for wing, and these would be, I don't know, maybe if they had wing tanks or whatever, fuselage tanks.
There were several fuselage tanks and there were wing tanks. The crazy thing about this gauge, and it was the same way in the 21, was it's not a gauge. It's a pointing system.
Right.
So you can set the gauge any way you want. So the crew chief comes up and says, you've got 4,000 liters, you put it on the 4. And then as the fuel goes into the engine, this thing ticks down. Or if you had a leak somewhere, it wouldn't register.
Yeah.
Pilots, especially if you fly fighters, you're always flying down the minimum fuel, right? So you're always watching that gauge. And one day I was coming back and this gauge was too low. I extended myself too much and I was a little bit nervous. So what I did was I reached down to this thing and I added 500 liters. I lost my nervousness. I was relaxed. Now the rational side of me knows that I was lying to myself, but the emotional side goes, you got gas after all. The psychologist would have a good time with that, but that's exactly what happened. This is the wing sweep indicator, and so the speed limit and the Mach limit is associated with wing sweep. So at 72 degrees, Mach 2.35. And if you move the wings forward, this is going to change, and the kilometers per hour is going to change also. The angle of attack is also associated with wing sweep, and then the wing sweep controls are down here.
Yeah.
If I could redesign the cockpit, I'd have put all this kind of like in the same spot.
Yeah.
But one of the things that you managed was, can you go too fast? A lot of American airplanes are thrust limited. The F-15 that I flew in level flight would never exceed max speed. This thing would exceed max speed in level flight without even trying, and it would be very comfortable. So paying attention to this and your Mach number and your speed, those are very important things to do while you're flying. So I came along late in the program. By the time I got there, most things were figured out pretty well. When we talked about these airplanes in the other two videos, I talked about the maintenance guys. We're stumbling around here figuring things out. They probably had some Russian help. Perhaps they didn't, I don't know. But for all the confusion that this cockpit presents to an American pilot and the challenges to understanding, I think that would be times 10 with the maintenance guys. Getting into the airplane the first time, we flew the 21 first, then I flew this. Before I flew the 21 for the first time, I remember my instructor saying to me, all right, you're going to take off and you're going to hear all kinds of noises and creaks and pops and so forth. Don't worry about it, it's going to be okay. And he was right. There were bangs and pops and noises and things I had not heard before. And I was perhaps amplified by my anxiety, but we were well trained and we were confident we could fly these things, and it worked pretty well. Bob, I'll ask you if you had a chance to look at any of these labels and figure them out. And now you're trying to read these upside down.
Vozdukh here would be air, okay? This button here, I do know. This is to jettison the drag chute. This may be the emergency in-flight restart button.
If I remember correctly, it was throttle off, airspeed 250, and then you did your switch and then...
You'd know that, I wouldn't you?
Well, when you're flying a single engine airplane restart, it's one of the things you remember.
Yes, sir, I can imagine. This is a fire extinguisher here, this little red button. They also have indicators here, switches for day and night.
We were not brave enough to fly these things at night.
I can see why. Tough enough during the day here, John.
Well, all the MiGs have this turquoise inside. It got the white stripe here for where to put the stick when you're in trouble. The turquoise part, man, I don't know. The speculation about it makes you feel calm. I've heard all these things, but I never felt relaxed inside the airplane, I'll tell you that. So over here, Bob, any of these? I don't remember any of these. I remember there's some of these back here.
Let's see.
These are fuel switches, fuel pump switches.
Okay, and the circuit breakers, as I recall. The black panel, John, has to do with channels.
Yep.
Canali, RLS. That's an interesting switch. RLS, radar. It's in the lower row there, John, the second from the left next to that.
This guy here?
Yes, sir, right there. Okay, so that's radar.
So these are just on-off switches.
Yes. Top right, I see the word, that is SAU again.
So that turns the system on and off.
Yeah, and again, I believe that is the acronym for autopilot. Sistema Автономного управления, so automatic pilot system.
The switches back here were the fuel pumps. We had everything turned off to start because we used a battery start. Okay. And then after you got the engine cranked, you'd turn things on. A lot of switches to turn on compared to what we're used to. Can you read that, guy?
It says don't touch, basically. No, it says for the handles, okay, position such. So what you have to do with both hands, you clamp down, you depress these, then you lift these up and turn them outward, and that initiates the ejection sequence, as I understand it.
Well, you've got safety wire on this thing, and you've got the safety grips there for that thing. You would not want to inadvertently pull that or snag that with your boot getting out. So that's why you have the safety meshes. We talked a lot about being very careful about deciding to use it for a number of reasons, but one guy did successfully eject. We had one guy that did not survive a crash. We talked about don't ever put yourself in this position to have to use it. And we talked about, well, maybe we shouldn't use it because the airplanes were so valuable. The commander I had when I was there was pretty adamant that use the seat. I don't want to go to a funeral, and I respect him greatly for helping come to that philosophy. And probably the one individual who did eject successfully benefited from that guy's guidance. But yeah, that's the handle there. And it takes, I guess it takes both hands. There's always a philosophy discussion about, are you trying to fly an airplane and try to eject? Can you control the stick? Like our airplanes, we had one handle down here that would eject you while you're trying to control it. If you got to grab with both hands, then you're not trying to control it. On the other hand, you're probably out of control anyway, once you've decided to eject. I am sitting very low in this cockpit, and I think the seat is down all the way. So this switch here would help me raise it once I got power on the airplane, and I would sit up a little bit higher. I'm gonna guess about here. It won't be much higher than this. In this airplane, you sit in it. Unlike an F-15 or F-16, you're sitting on top of it. I do remember that if you're going to mess with these fuel switches back here, it was easier to do with the canopy open before you moved. Once the canopy was down, your helmet would run into the canopy and you wouldn't be able to see very well. But compared to the more modern fighters that we flew at the time, the F-15, F-16, you do sit very deeply in this thing. That's also why they had the periscope up there. They got two mirrors to help you look behind you, and then one in the middle up there is the periscope. I tried to use that a few times. It's a very narrow field of view, and it's a mirror. It's kind of like driving your car while looking in your rearview mirror. Just unnatural. Tactically, if someone you thought was behind you, you just put the wings back and put the burner on and try to run, because you weren't going to outturn them. Let me ask you this. Can you read this one? I can't remember what that switch there is, that lever.
I think those gauges may have something to do with brake pressure.
That was my guess. The MiG-21, they're over here, and this one here is going to be your normal brake system and your backup brake system pressures. Okay. What did we learn today? Well, I relearned that it's a very complicated cockpit with a lot of switches that are not organized in the way that we would like to have them organized. But it goes back again to the difference in philosophies between that country and our country. In our country, we all work together and try to make things have teamwork and so forth, as opposed to being stovepiped. But this airplane did what it did well. It would take off and fly fast. It would not turn well. One of the things I said to myself after I flew the 21, after I flew this, that I would never, ever, 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 ever complain about human engineering in America again, because this thing is such a chocolate mess in that regard. The oil pressure gauge on this thing is down there where you can't see it. So I'm sitting here, I'm just remembering and reimagining, the helmet on, the canopy's down, I can't turn very well, but here's a gauge right here. I'm supposed to read in flight.
And by the way, John, incidentally, this is an oxygen gauge.
Is it? Well, that's not important.
Pretty important.
That's not important. Well, Bob, it's been a great assist. Thank you very much for helping me remember where these things, switches and so forth. It's been another great opportunity to reminisce from a long time ago about flying this airplane.
Yeah, my pleasure, and thanks very much for sharing your expertise with us, John. Very much appreciated. Thank you.
You betcha. Well, we couldn't get to everything, so if you have questions or comments to leave them under the video. We'll get to as many of those as we can. And when you get a chance, come to the museum and check out this aircraft and all the rest of them that are here. Well, you've made it to the end of the video. If you subscribe, thank you. And if you don't subscribe, well, just do it. I'll see ya.